Welcome back to Ciara Chats episode 3. My name is Ciara, and today we are chatting about all the books I read in 2025. I read 10 books this year, which is my reading goal. That was my reading goal. I was going to say it was less, but it's not. I really tried to prioritize reading this year. Later in the year, like once I started college in September, I really started to get back into a reading kick. And I'm still in the reading kick, but I have the type of relationship with reading that I feel a lot of people have, where it's very on and off. Like, I'll get super into reading for like 2 months, and then I won't read anything for like 2 months. And it just kind of ebbs and flows, which I think is relatable, but, you know, it's been hard for me sometimes to get out of a reading slump. But I'm definitely in a reading kick right now. I've been reading a ton of books in the last few months, and I'm really happy about it. My goal for next year is going to be a little bit more ambitious than this year. My goal for next year is to read 14 books. I was going to do 12, one for every month, but I wanted to go a little harder. So I'm going to try and do 14. I think it'll be doable because, I can do one a month and then, fit 2 in somewhere else. So I think it'll work, but that's my goal for next year. But enough talk about next year. Let's talk about this year. If you don't know me, I'll give a little bit of an introduction to the kind of reader that I am. I mostly read, I guess you would call it literary fiction. I mean, in general, I mostly read fiction, but it's a lot of, like, a mix of different genres. Like, I'm not a huge fantasy person, but I will read romance. I'll read a classic. Basically anything with a good plot, I'll get into. I also tend to describe myself as a book masochist, which essentially just means that I want the book to be so emotionally charged that it hurts me, basically. So, an example of that is my favorite book in the world is The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Not a happy one. I enjoyed reading A Little Life, although I'll never recommend it to anyone. What else? A lot of books about mental health are things that I really enjoy, so Be More Chill, sorry. That book was great. I really enjoyed that. And then I read books about more serious topics, too, like nonfiction things, and a few of those I will mention now. So let's get into the 10 books I read this year. Starting off with a banger, first book I read this year ended up being a 5-star read for me, and it was Columbine by Dave Cullen. I'll put the cover of all the books that I read right here. This book, obviously by the title, was about the 1999 Columbine high school shooting. And the author, Dave Cullen, he is a reporter who basically has spent his entire journalistic career researching and reporting on Columbine. So he's somewhat of an expert on the topic. Obviously, this is a nonfiction book because Columbine was something that happened. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was beautifully written. It can be hard to write a nice book about a topic as sickening as a school shooting, and one of the most influential school shootings in history. But this book was truly beautifully written. All the storylines are real storylines, but all the storylines were well thought out and well crafted, and you really can connect to each character and meet them in the place that they were at in their life. I will add, this book is very detailed. There are a lot of points of view that relate to the incident, and it can be graphic and disturbing at times. So if you're using this video as a book recommendation list, just keep in mind that there are some details about gun violence and what people went through in the before, during, and after of the Columbine shooting. But I found this book very gripping. There were words in it and phrases and sentences and passages that stuck with me all day while I was reading it, and this was a book that I didn't really want to put down. I really wanted to read it all in one setting, which I didn't. It took me about a week, but I really enjoyed it. So that was the first book. By the way, if you see me glancing over here, my iPad is sitting there with my notes on it, so that's what I'm reading. But the second book that I read this year was Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner, and I gave this book 4 stars. I actually read this book in high school for my senior contemporary literature class, and honestly, this is the only book in high school that I actually read cover to cover. Most books I skated by skimming and SparkNotes and whatever else, but I actually read this book cover to cover because I genuinely enjoyed it. Once again, this book was beautifully written. There are wonderful descriptions of food in this book. Don't read this book without food near you because you will be starving afterwards. because there are vivid descriptions of how food looked, how food smelled, and you'll definitely want to eat. This book is about the author's life. It's about her Korean American identity and her relationships with her parents, mostly her mother, and grief. And through that, she uses food as a central theme. So I think that anyone with any experience with grief can relate to this book in some way. There will be a character you relate to. There will be a plot point that you relate to. Grief is something that everybody is going to experience at some point in their life, and it's something that we really should talk about more because everybody's going to experience it, and this book is a great starting place for that, to get comfortable and start having conversations about it. I also think that I may have connected to this book more because I read it in school. I think that if I had read it just recreationally by myself, I probably wouldn't have connected as much because in school I was studying it. So I was really thinking about the thematic, the themes, and really thinking about what the author was trying to say to me, which if I had read it on my own, I probably wouldn't have done that to the same extent, which is not a good thing. I honestly should change how I read to be more like that. But yeah, 4 stars for this book. Third book that I read this year, and an author that will come back around, Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And I gave this book 4.5 stars. I really loved it. So this book is about a tennis player named Carrie Soto who comes out of retirement to reclaim her Grand Slam record. It's a good classic comeback story for anybody who has any experience in athletics like I do. We love a good comeback. We love an underdog. It's a perfect storyline, so this book was really enjoyable. I will say you probably do need a little bit of tennis knowledge to really understand this book because she does mention scoring, and tennis scoring can be kind of complicated. She does mention certain kind of niches to tennis, but I do think you don't need to focus on tennis just to enjoy this book. You can definitely read this book without the tennis knowledge because it is explained. But this story really is just a good attention-grabbing plot, and there are great characters all throughout the story. There were some that I really connected with and some that I really did not connect with, which I think is perfect for a book. But I truly believe that most athletes, particularly tennis players, obviously, would enjoy this book. Number 4, I read Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. I'm probably mispronouncing that, I'm sorry, but I give this book 4 stars. You're going to notice that I rated my books pretty highly throughout the entire year, and that's because I tend to read within my comfort zone. So next year I will definitely be trying to branch out of my comfort zone and hopefully getting some lower rated books and maybe some new 5 stars. But yeah, anyway, I gave this book 4 stars. This book is about a young Iranian American poet named Cyrus who is an addict, and he's trying to basically find the meaning of his life. And he becomes obsessed with martyrdom, and through his obsession, he investigates his family's past. Now, I found this to be a really engaging read, but it did have a little bit of pacing issues sometimes, mostly towards the beginning. I do think that's largely a personal thing. That was me struggling with the book. I don't think every single person is going to struggle with the pacing of this book, but it was truly an engaging read. I really did love it. The plot was great, characters were great, and there are some twists that you will not see coming. It was a very well-written novel, especially for being a debut novel. I actually did not know it was a debut novel when I started reading it, so I was thoroughly impressed, and I really do hope this author puts out more work because I will read it. Book number 5 that I read this year is Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. And unsurprisingly, if you know me, I gave this book 5 stars. John Green is one of my favorite authors of all time. I grew up on those books, The Fault in Our Stars, Paper Towns. I've read every single book he's ever written. So when Everything's Tuberculosis came out, and knowing John Green's obsession that he has with tuberculosis, if you watch his YouTube videos, I'm sure you know, I had to read this. I had to pick it up, and I do not regret it at all. It was absolutely incredible. This is one of my favorite John Green books of all time, and like I said, I've read all of them. And this is a nonfiction book, but it's a good balance of storytelling, history, and science. So this is about the history and persistence of the disease, tuberculosis, hence the title. And I think if you read this book, you really will connect to the characters. He does tell people stories, like one of the main characters is a boy named Henry. You will connect to Henry's character. I would be surprised if you didn't, because I certainly did. And also, reading this book is going to make you rethink how we're living right now. You're going to find yourself rethinking policies and rethinking what we're doing with our future and how we're moving into the world in a medical sense. I do think this book is very accessible. You might be thinking that it would be a little science heavy, but it's truly not. This is a great balance of being accessible and being educational. You don't need a science degree to understand this book. I read it in high school. I did not have a science degree, and you'll definitely learn something when you read this book. The reading experience I had with this book was very happy. There is a really happy feeling, and it's almost similar to the feeling you get when you watch someone talk about something they're passionate about, because John Green certainly is passionate about tuberculosis, and you will feel his passion through his writing. And there was one quote from this book that really stuck out for me, and I wanted to read it just because I think it applies to life today. And that quote is, "Nothing is so privileged as thinking history belongs to the past." Think about that one. The 6th book I read this year was Educated by Tara Westover, and I gave this book 5 stars. This book is a memoir about the author overcoming her Mormon family and going to college and pursuing her education and her identity. I actually read this on vacation in China. Go check out my China vlog on my main channel if you haven't seen it. But this book was very well written and vivid, detailed stories. It was great. I could not put this book down. It was incredible. There is a mix of hope and horror stories within this book, and each one is better than the last. I was gripped all the way through this book. I did not struggle with it at all. I recommend it to pretty much anybody who will listen to me talk about it, which is you because you're watching this. But I have an entirely different background to the author. I've grown up completely different from how she did, but I did not have any trouble connecting with the storyline and with the characters and the plot. And I found it very fascinating to hear someone talk about a background and an upbringing that is so separate from mine. I truly would recommend this book to most people. Pretty much anybody, I think, could enjoy this book, and it was an easy but very gripping read. Book number 7 that I read this year is kind of a cheesy one. It's called How to Hold a Cockroach by Matthew Maxwell, and I gave it 3.5 stars. This book was gifted to me by Izzy last year around Christmas or my birthday, one of the two, and I was very excited to read it. This is about freeing ourselves from beliefs that cause us to suffer, and all of that story is told through the analogy of a cockroach. Yeah, I know, it's a cockroach, but it was a very cute metaphor, and this book was very enjoyable. I think it would be a good book to read and to return to whenever you start to feel lost in your life, because it definitely has a very good message that most people need to hear. Book number 8 that I read this year is Evicted by Matthew Desmond, and I gave this book 3 stars. This book is about 8 families in Milwaukee and how they navigate the housing system of our country. I would be very surprised if there is anybody out there who could read this book and not feel connected to the character's story and feel empathetic towards them. It would be very, very difficult to read this book and not connect in some way or another. I think this book is kind of infuriating because the stories are just so frustrating, but they're very well told and very, very nicely written. You will learn a lot from this book, and you will rethink a lot of what you thought you knew and how we should move forward in the future. It's definitely a devastating book, but it's very eye-opening to the major housing issues that we have in this country. The only reason that I gave this book a 3-star is because it started to feel a little repetitive towards the end, and I did start to lose a little bit of interest. However, I do understand that the repetitive nature was probably a thematic choice because many of the characters are living through the same cycle over and over and over again. But book form, it did lose my interest a little bit. Again, that might just be a personal preference of mine. But I do definitely want to reread this book in a few months or a few years because I think there is very valuable information that I need to soak into my head. Second to last book that I read this year, book 9, was Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid, a 5-star and my favorite read of the year. I love this book. I heard about this book from Soph Mosca, the YouTuber who read it. I believe she filmed herself reading the end of it and sobbing, and I did not film myself, but trust me, I was sobbing when it ended. This is a historical fiction romance novel about Joan Goodwin, who is an astronaut at NASA in the 1980s. And I actually knew virtually nothing about this book except that it was about an astronaut. And I did not know when starting it that this was an LGBTQ story. So that was a very pleasant surprise when I got there. I was rooting for the two LGBTQ characters so hard. I love Taylor Jenkins Reid. I love how her books flow and how they read. So if you like her other books, I highly recommend this one. It came out this year, so it is very new, but I highly recommend. The book is a little bit complicated because it's about NASA and space exploration, and that's not a simple topic, but it is very well researched, and it is an easy read because it is so well researched and very well explained. So if you're kind of trying to branch your way into novels about space exploration, I'm not sure how many of those exist, this would be a good way to do it. But yeah, I was absolutely gripped by this book. I was so into it the whole way through. I flew through this book. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I saw my eyes out at the end. So just take that as a warning. I think a difficulty some people may have with this book is connecting to the story at the beginning, but push through that because you will connect by the end. There are so many characters to choose from that you will totally connect to, and you will not want to stop reading this. But this is my favorite book of this year, and maybe my favorite book of recent years. The final book I read this year, number 10, and a close one for me, was A Real Emergency by Joanna Sokol, and I also gave this book 5 stars. This book is about stories of a paramedic who worked on an ambulance in Reno, Nevada, San Francisco, and Santa Cruz, California. I chose this book because I am working to being an EMT. I actually got ambulance certified today, but this book hit kind of close to home for me, so I really was gripped by it. I just found it randomly in the bookstore in Santa Cruz and loved it. It's great. The stories are dark, many of them. There are lighthearted ones, but the truth with the job is many stories are dark, but they are beautifully written, and you will certainly enjoy reading them. I highly recommend this book to anyone in the medical field, especially EMS, but anybody else in general as well. You will still be able to connect to it even if you don't have a medical background. There are super powerful stories in this book, both of providers and of patients, and a good mix of humor because you do really need that to survive in a job like this. But it's a great insight to the 911 system and the work that EMTs and paramedics do. So if you're at all interested in that, I highly recommend you check this book out. Now to end this video, I'm going to talk about the book that I'm reading now and probably will finish in the new year, and that is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I am about 45-50% of the way through and loving it. I love Steinbeck. I read him in high school and on my own time. We read Of Mice and Men in high school. I love his writing style. The story is beautiful. The characters are incredible. I'm so gripped, and I really want to know what happens in the future. So I'm actually going to go read that some more. So thank you so much for watching this. If you have any other suggestions of podcast episodes you want to see me make, leave them in the comments, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Bye.